Today I want to talk you through something that destroys the entire myth of Trump's so-called war on drugs. Because once you put the pieces together, the story that emerges is not one of fighting cartels, but partnering with them, actually, It's not one of protecting America, but aligning with the very criminal networks he claims he wants to destroy. And the most disturbing part is that it's not random. Well, you decide, okay? When you step back, you see a clear psychological and political pattern that repeats itself over and over again, from Mexico to Honduras to Venezuela to Saudi Arabia, Russia, Turkey, and beyond. So let's start with the event that should have made front-page news everywhere, but actually barely broke through. The entry of 17 family members of the Sinaloa cartel into the United States under what Mexican officials publicly described as a deal with the Trump administration. These weren't anonymous migrants. These weren't asylum seekers. These weren't people in hiding. These were the families of high-ranking members of the Sinaloa cartel, the cartel funded by El Chapo, the cartel that has pumped unimaginable amounts of fentanyl, heroin, meth, and cocaine into the United States. These were the people closest to the leadership, and instead of being stopped, detained, or questioned, these 17 individuals walked across the border from Tijuana to San Diego with their luggage, were met by U.S. personnel, and were allowed to enter. Now, here's where it gets even worse. The United States has never publicly explained why. There is no public record of the legal authority used to let them in. There is no explanation of whether they were granted protected status, temporary residency, cooperation agreements, or anything else. We just don't know if they were questioned. We don't know where they were relocated. We don't know if they're still being monitored. And importantly, there is zero evidence that they were granted any kind of status or not granted any kind of status. Okay, we don't know. But the fact that they were allowed in at all, quietly, privately, and as part of a deal, tells you everything about the difference between Trump's public performance of toughness and his real-world behavior. Because think about it. Trump goes on stage talking about executing drug dealers, shooting traffickers, boats out of the water, bringing back draconian punishments, militarizing the border, treating migrants as invaders, but behind closed doors, his administration is escorting the families of cartel bosses into the United States without any explanation. How is that a war on drugs? How is that zero tolerance? How does that make any sense unless you understand the larger pattern? And the moment you understand that this wasn't an isolated event, but part of a much bigger picture, everything clicks into place like a puzzle. The next piece of that pattern is Trump's plan to pardon Juan Orlando Hernández, the former president of Honduras, who was convicted in U.S. federal court of running his country as a narco-state. And let me be very clear, Hernández wasn't a corrupt politician taking a few bribes. He was coordinating with traffickers, protecting cocaine routes into the United States, using police and military forces to guarantee safe passage for drug shipments, and helping move hundreds of tons of cocaine. He was personally involved in trafficking networks tied to the Sinaloa cartel. He was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. And what did Trump do just recently? He publicly announced that he plans to grant Hernandez a full pardon. Think about the message that sends. Trump says he wants to execute drug dealers, but he wants to pardon the man who controlled the entire country's drug pipeline. Trump protects migrants fleeing cartel violence, but he protects the man who helped empower those cartels. Trump claims he's fighting narco-terror, but he wants to release the literal narco-president who helped flood the U.S. with cocaine. Once again, this is not a war on drugs. This is a loyalty to powerful criminals who remind him, well, of something that he wants for himself. And then there's Venezuela, the final piece that makes the pattern impossible to ignore. Trump loves to talk about Venezuela as a narco-state, and honestly, well, he's not wrong. The Cartel de los Soles, a drug trafficking and money laundering organization embedded inside the Venezuelan armed forces, is real. It's real. Senior officers are involved. Government officials are involved. Venezuela is, in many ways, has a hybrid political criminal system. It does. But here's the pattern that matters. Trump treats Venezuela differently, not because he opposes narco-states, but because Venezuela doesn't serve him politically. Because when you look at the leaders he admires, that's Putin, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Erdogan, Kim Jong-un, they are all running governments that function, well, a bit far right and like criminal syndicates. Putin uses assassination, mercenaries, smuggling networks. Kim Jong-un oversees meth production, counterfeit operations, and illegal arms trade. Erdogan has been accused of mafia connections and illicit oil deals. Saudi Arabia's monarchy, well, is a royal cartel. And Hernandez was a literal narco-president. Trump respects these men. He somehow praises them. He openly admires them. And the Sinaloa family deal fits perfectly into that world, doesn't it? Because here is the real psychological truth. Trump doesn't identify with democratic leaders. He doesn't admire rule of law. He doesn't respect institutions. He admires people who rule like cartel bosses. He sees strength in men who use fear, intimidation, violence, and corruption to maintain control. He gravitates toward governments where the line between state and, a ruler don't really exist. And that explains everything. When Trump says drug dealers should be executed, he isn't talking about cartel bosses or corrupt presidents or military commanders who oversee drug pipelines. He is talking about low-level offenders. He is talking about desperate people. He is talking about small fish, not big sharks. Because psychologically, Trump splits the world into strong and weak. He talked about it many times. The weak, addicts, migrants, low-level smugglers get punished. The strong, elites, cartel elites, narco-presidents, authoritarian rulers, well, those people, they get protection, that they get admiration from Trump. To him, power is morality. Power is legitimacy. Power is truth. If you have power, he sees you as an equal, as a partner, as someone who deserves loyalty. If you don't, he sees you as disposable. That is why you see this bizarre contradiction where Trump performs toughness on stage but negotiates with cartel families in private. That is why he pardons powerful criminals. That is why he praises authoritarian leaders who operate like mafia bosses. That is why he treats criminal state structures with admiration instead of condemnation. And that's why his entire war on drugs collapses the moment you look at his actions instead of his words. Because this isn't a war on drugs. It's a war on accountability. It's a war on the powerless. And it is a protection racket for the powerful. 17 family members of cartel leadership walked into the United States under a secretive agreement. The former president of a narco-state is being promised a full pardon. The leaders of countries that literally function as criminal enterprises are being praised as strong, talented, and effective. Once you understand this pattern, everything makes sense. Trump doesn't hate crime. He hates limits. He hates constraints. He hates being questioned. He hates anyone who is trying to expose anything. But when it comes to people who break the law at the highest levels, the kind of people who run empires of violence and fear, those are the men he feels comfortable around because these are strong men. So no, the war on drugs isn't actually real. It never was. What's real is Trump building alliances with the people who run drug economies and weaponizing fear against the people who suffer from them. And the only way to stop this is to name the pattern clearly. Because once people see it, once they understand the contradiction between the performance and the behavior, well, the illusion collapses, or at least I'd like to think so. Call it what it is: a strong man protecting other strong men, a wannabe king protecting dictators, a president negotiating with cartels, a fake war designed to distract from real alliances, and a political movement that is not tough on crime, but deeply, actually, intertwined with it. And the American people deserve to know this and to see this better. Now, what do you think?